you've basically dedicated your whole life to learning, research, and really understanding, fitness, bodybuilding, nutrition, and it's amazing how much time you dedicated to it.
Well, the way I look at it, Vlad, there's a kind of a spectrum. On the lower part of the spectrum, you have the bro science guys that basically make things up as they get along. They pull things out of the air. You've probably gone online. You've seen some of these steroid regimes. They're based on no science. Some of the comments I see, I mean, they're actually to me like they're humorous. They're actually funny. These people just make things up, and unfortunately, people who don't have the knowledge, they believe these guys, even though the guys very rarely identify themselves. And the other end of the spectrum, you have the guys that are highly educated, the PhDs. Some of these guys are college professors, researchers. They have the knowledge, but their knowledge, the problem with them is their knowledge is often very specialized in only one or two areas. And if you throw certain questions at them, they're as blank as the bro science guys. They can't answer, And a lot of these guys actually, I know it sounds funny, they're involved in exercise physiology, nutrition, all these subjects that are related to bodybuilding. A lot of them don't actually work out. So that's another problem. They can't experience what a guy in the gym actually experienced. My thing is I'm kind of in the middle in the sense that I think I have a lot more knowledge than the bro science guys. I have a lot of evidence-based knowledge. But the difference between me and let's say the academic guys is I'm able to communicate and interpret what they write about. In other words, the research, I can make it palatable and interesting to a person that doesn't, let's say, have the scientific background. And as you said, I've been studying this stuff for, believe it or not, it's over 5 decades. It started when I was a kid. I actually wrote to I was only, believe it or not, I think I was about maybe 13 years old. I wrote to a famous bodybuilder named Bill Pearl. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's a triple Mr. Universe. And I asked him for a recommendation on a nutrition book. And he told me to buy this book called Let's Eat Right to Keep Fit by a nutritionist from the early 60s. Her name was Adele Davis. And I was fascinated. I immediately was hooked. And I've been studying nutrition ever since. It's been steady, nonstop for over 50 years, believe it or not.
Do you still remember that book?
I still remember it. I certainly do. I can remember. I remember a lot of things she said.
Well, it's also interesting because I'm sure a lot of things evolved over the years, right? So maybe some of the things that you believed and the whole industry believed, 20 years ago is completely different now.
Oh, that's absolutely true. In fact, I can tell you as a competitive bodybuilder, I come from the era when I competed. That was the era of Arnold and those guys, the golden era, Gold's Gym, the original Gold's Gym. I mean, we believed in extended workouts. I mean, if you didn't do at least 20 sets of a muscle group, you really weren't training. I mean, we did things like, I remember training my calves. In order to get my calves to grow, I trained them 6 days a week, 30 sets a day, 6 days a week. I mean, looking back now, I did some insane things, but that was the knowledge of the era. We didn't know. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes, and that's another thing I try and do in my newsletter. See, I'm trying to impart my own experience to prevent people today, young guys, from making the same mistakes I did, so they don't waste their time and hit their head against the wall.
Still an amazing shape, though. I've seen images of you from that era, and you were a bodybuilder. I mean, you were a competitive bodybuilder.
I was a competitive bodybuilder, and I did it all naturally. I know a lot of people say that, but I really did, and I can tell you why. I mean, I'm not afraid to express why. I really, back then when I competed in my 20s, I didn't know a lot about steroids. I knew what they were, basically how they worked, but I didn't know the long-term effects. And back in those days, today it sounds funny to say this, but because I have all these guys walking around with shaved heads, But back then, if a guy lost one strand of hair, he'd want to commit suicide. And I had genetic male pattern baldness. Both my grandfathers were bald when they were in their 30s. I had this morbid fear of losing my hair. And I heard somewhere along the line, somebody told me that if you take steroids, it can cause male pattern baldness to turn on, where all your hair would fall out. This was absolutely anathema to me. I said, I'm not taking steroids. So I have to make an admission. The actual reason why I never took steroids had nothing to do with, the cancer, the heart disease. It was purely, vanity reasons. I just didn't want to go bald. Oddly enough, today, and I always tell this to people, they say, well, what if you knew back then what you know today? And I have to admit it, I would have taken steroids because, and I'll tell you why, I know exactly how to do it. I know how to do it safely. So I would take it. I would not take let's say the pro programs that some of the guys, I would not touch that stuff, but I would do it as a little bit of boost to my bodybuilding training. As a matter of fact, I actually retired from competition mainly because I had gotten to the point where I was doing well in local and state shows. If I wanted to go into a national show, I mean, everybody even back then was on steroids. 99% of the competitors. I could not compete on even ground. I realized unless I got on the drug bandwagon, and I had to make the decision, and I decided to go, just to drop out, continue training hard, but quit competition, and that's the reason I stopped.
Now, Jerry, I want to talk about the supplement industry.
Mhm.
It seems like from the 80s and 90s it's been growing tremendously. Everybody has a supplement line now. It seems like it's so oversaturated. Why do you think consumers keep purchasing that stuff? Over and over and over again. I recently spoke to a few bodybuilders, and they even say they don't take that stuff. They just take natural food, and egg whites and stuff like that, and just whatever they eat. But he's still selling it. It's way overpriced, and it seems like everybody just keeps selling the same stuff in different packagings.
Most of your nutrients should be obtained from food first. Food should be your primary source of nutrition. There's no doubt about that. Let's take protein supplements, for example. Let's say you're very busy, you're a busy person, you're running around, you don't have time to eat 5 protein meals a day, but you need to have a certain amount of protein. You want to gain some muscle. A whey supplement or something like that could be a good option because it's easy to mix, it's fast, it doesn't take time to cook. There's nothing wrong with that. It has no fat, it has no calories. It provides a couple of nutrients in there that you can't even get from food, so it's a good option. So, in answer to your question, to put in a complete statement, I think a person needs to really kind of look at their own nutrition and their own diet and decide what supplements they need. For example, whatever, if you're not following a balanced diet, if you're not eating a certain amount of fruits and vegetables, or if you're not eating enough protein, those are the things you need to supplement. You need to supplement the nutrients that are missing in the fruits and vegetables. Otherwise, you're going to, sooner or later, uh, being deficient in those nutrients is going to catch up with you. You're going to get screwed up. Your muscle gains are going to be held back. So it has to be very individualized. See, a lot of people, as you point out, a lot of bodies, they don't need protein. I mean, a guy who's eating 200-300 grams of protein, to take a protein supplement is absolutely absurd. A guy who's eating, let's say, meat 5 times a week, to take a creatine supplement, no, waste of money. So again, it has to be. But now, let's say you have a vegan who's not eating any meat. To them, taking a creatine supplement would have a tremendous effect. So it has to be very personalized. I would never call certain supplements, to be honest with you, and I write about this in my newsletter, I have to admit, I don't pull any punches, are absolute crap. They don't do anything. And the studies that have showed that they work, they're often paid for by the companies that sell the supplements. So there's an ulterior motive. There is a lot of garbage on the market. I do admit that. But to make a broad statement and say all supplements are snake oil and garbage, that just isn't true. They're what they are. The key word is that they're supplements. They're supplements to your diet, to your nutrition. They're supposed to provide what you're not getting with your normal diet. If you look at it from that point of view, you can't go wrong. But no, I agree with you. In other words, you don't need to take 20 different supplements. This is driven by advertising hype. In other words, the ads in the magazines, they lead people that, let's say, don't have a science background or don't know how these supplements work. They lead them to believe that if they don't take this particular supplement, they're doomed as far as gaining muscle. They're not going to gain. This is complete nonsense, complete hype. For example, I mean, you look at creatine. The best kind of creatine is simple creatine monohydrate. That was the original, the first, still the cheapest form. And yet, if you look on the market, there's what? I lost count. There's probably 10, 15 different kinds of creatine. But the truth of the matter is, the only difference between them and the actual original creatine monohydrate is the newer forms are about 5 to 10 times more expensive. Once it gets in your body, creatine is creatine. And how much gets in your blood, the ads talk about higher absorption into the blood. That's meaningless. How much gets in your blood doesn't mean a thing. What counts is how much gets into the muscle. And in the end, it's what they call the creatine transport protein that counts, not how much is in the blood. So it makes no difference. My point is, it makes no difference what type of creatine you use. I mean, the problem is consumers need to be educated. They need to be able to see through the crap and the hype that's being thrown at them everywhere. Websites, magazines, they're being inundated to believe that they need these supplements.
It's interesting because a lot of times bodybuilders don't get a lot of respect, but at the same time, every athlete in the world, when they talk about nutrition and they talk about workout, they go to bodybuilding, right? To get the knowledge and advice for somebody like yourself. Can you talk about that experience a little bit working with different athletes from different sports?
Okay, first of all, what you said is absolutely correct. People put down bodybuilders. They call them muscle heads, dummies. These negative terms. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at it from a nutrition and exercise point of view, bodybuilders are often years ahead of the science. And the truth is, a lot of the let's say the deep aspects of exercise and nutrition do originate in bodybuilding. I mean, and as you said, a lot of the athletes duplicate the supplementation procedures and even the drug procedures. It all comes from bodybuilding. That's the funny thing. And as far as working with athletes, I've worked with athletes from just about every different sport. I did a lot of work with professional boxers in the 90s. I was Oscar De La Hoya's personal nutritionist for 2 years, and I think it was 12 professional bouts. He was undefeated. And my experience, Vlad, to tell you the truth, is when I first started doing it, I was very shocked because these were not like little, kids in junior high school. These were world-class elite athletes that had coaches, they had, all these people around them, and yet their diets and nutrition programs were atrocious, bar none. They had no idea how to eat right, and it suddenly dawned on me that, my God, these guys achieved their success strictly on their training and their genetic gifts because they had no nutrition background at all, no support. And I put these guys on solid nutrition programs. I made it very individualized for the sport. In other words, I wouldn't give the same diet and supplements to a professional basketball player as I would to Oscar De La Hoya. They were two different, it has to be individualized. And bar none, I could say this honestly, bar none, every one of these athletes showed performance improvements. Now, somebody can say, well, that's just a placebo effect. I mean, they thought, you gave them these pills and they believed it would work, so it did work. The problem with that is, this is kind of funny, I can't think of one pro athlete who asked me what I was giving them. In other words, when I used to hand them the pills, no one ever said, hey, Jerry, what is this one? What is this one? I could have been giving them cyanide and arsenic. They would just swallow it because they trust. Of course, I wouldn't do that. But in other words, they weren't into this stuff. That's in other words, like, bodybuilders, believe it or not, they are more analytical than the athletes. The bodybuilders want to know, what does this vitamin do? How will it help me build muscle? The athletes just say, will it make me faster, stronger, whatever? Boom, they take it. That's all they want to know. When I work with boxers, I work with a lot of the fighters that weren't heavyweights. You have to make weight, just like the MMA guys and the fighter. I mean, I never once failed to have a fighter make weight, not once. And after the fight, like De La Hoya would come, as soon as he weighed, he'd get off the scale. I was off to the side. And I'd give him his weight gain drink as soon as he got off the scale, because he did kind of dehydrate to make weight. And he'd say, it was always the same conversation. Oscar, what do you want to weigh for the fight? Now, remember, the fight was only 1 day away. This was on a Friday. The fight was on a Saturday. What do you want to weigh? Whatever he wanted to weigh, I gauged how many calories and how many meals he'd need, and I got him to that exact weight. In one fight, believe it or not, he wanted to actually gain 19 pounds in 1 day. This is almost impossible when you think about it. But what happened was, to make weight, he was very dehydrated. In other words, he just had no water in him at all. So all I did is basically replace the water without getting him bloated, and I gave him meals like every 2 hours. I mean, more, like a bodybuilder. I mean, and I did give him weight gain drinks. And believe it or not, the next day when they weighed him right before the fight, he was exactly 19 pounds heavier. And I have to admit, I myself was shocked. I thought I put maybe 10 pounds on him. I was stunned. I almost fell down when I saw that. I'll never forget that. And he beat the hell out of the guy, by the way. That's what he wanted to be bigger, because he wanted to inflict a lot of damage. And it worked. It worked, A guy named Ben Weider. Ben Weider was Joe Weider's younger brother. And, they had a kind of agreement. Joe ran the magazines, and Ben ran what they call the IFBB, which is, covers the contest. He was the president. He traveled the country. And Ben went all over the world trying to convince various sports federations to support bodybuilding so it can get in the Olympics. He came very close to having it as a